Dear subscribers, as you know, we shared many information for you, and we are studying very hard to find current news for you. However, I cannot use this channel for future. Please follow our new channel called as Daily News Report and watch our video to support us. Link in description. Also, you can reach the video we shared on Daily News Report by clicking on the top right button. We highly recommend watching, subscribing, and sharing. We will continue to share some news on this channel, but we take precautions against some situations for future. Thank you for supporting us.
This video posted with permission. The financial and political opinions expressed in this video are not necessarily of Financial Argument or its staff. Opinions expressed in this video do not constitute personalized investment advice and should not be relied on for making investment decisions.
Gold standard imposition by the East will result in the United States falling into the third world. We'll have a currency crisis. Take a close look at what's going on in Venezuela. I know people say, "Oh, it could never happen here." Well, what if we print money to cover all the debts, and the rest of the world is gradually turning to gold and gold payment systems and gold platforms, and we're sanctioning country after country after country after country after country, and then we finally sanction most of Europe, and they don't accept the dollar, and they don't operate on the dollar. What do? We have our own currency, and we support our debt with printing, monetizing our debt, and our currency loses value very, very rapidly. So we must source the gold. We must source it by our own ownership or by lease. And no one wants to lease it because we always steal it. We need to source the gold by ownership, rescue, or leasing, or we fall into the third world.
Today we have a returning guest, Jim Willie. Jim is the editor of the Hat Trick Letter. You can find it on www.goldenjackass.com. Check out his new letter. He is highly regarded as one of the leading experts on the gold and silver market. He is also highly regarded for his forecasts on currency-related collapses, bank defaults. He is on top of the gold market, and I'd like to welcome Jim back.
Oh, great to be back on, Dave. It's been a couple months, and it's been an action-packed couple of months. I've noticed a lot of positive things regarding certain things, and I know I'm vague, but there's a renewed interest, I think, in the alternative messages regarding the financial world. That's my new conclusion. Something's going on, and it's big. Something is happening, and it's big. I think we've got an awakening process in progress. It's very hard to know. Something has happened since June. I'm noticing a lot more activity. I'm noticing more orders. I'm noticing more questions. I'm noticing a lot more emails. I'm noticing clients sending me stuff of high interest. Valuable items. More. I think we've got an awakening, and I've always been saying that 90% of the United States of American crowd is pretty lost, either from lack of intelligence, lack of ability to synthesize events and their meaning, lack of ability to do much of anything except, eat, drink, fart, shit, and whatever, base human activity. But for the other 10%, I think we have an awakening. Something's going on. I think they're seeing. One client of mine put it very well, and a colleague had said the same thing. He said, "Jim, people are beginning to notice things are not right. That the economy is nowhere near as being described by the government officials. They're talking about full employment now because the state unemployment insurance figures are so low. The jobless rate is not unemployment anymore. The jobless rate is percentage of people collecting state unemployment insurance. And, we got people on the news networks talking about unemployment rates never been lower. These are great times. But everybody knows somebody who's recently unemployed. Everybody knows somebody who's part of a company that just folded. The dissonance between what they're seeing and what they're hearing has never been worse. And I call it very simply Reich economics, not R-I-G-H-T, R-E-I-C-H, as in Fourth Reich, because I think our country has been taken over. It got taken over at 9/11, got taken over legally with Patriot Act. You can go on and on about all the different creeping steps of the fascist state. Now we've got controlled news, censoring of alternate, networks. It's really bad. You got complaints from people with, video shows as their business and income streams dependent on them, some of whom have had me on their shows. It's ad revenue. It's search engines removing certain alternative avenues and channels and features. I have a couple smart clients saying, Jim, you're not getting as many orders for the hat-trick letter as you used to because you're not appearing anywhere near the top for gold and currency financial analysis. I said, well, that may be, but can't stop the flow of the internet for interviews. And they say, well, actually, the searches for them are down too. And the income stream for the shows is down for your hosts. So the movement is pretty broad. And I've got some unenlightened people at times telling me, I've noticed that there's censoring of certain things. And I say, well, what got censored? And they said, well, it was some historical thing that I was trying to read about Russia. So why were you reading about Russia? And the person, this is an unenlightened person, a general dull bulb. And he said to me, I don't know, there's just so much crap going on in the news about the Russian dossier and the Trump connection to Russia and, Putin meeting with Trump. I just thought I'd read a little bit about Russia, and I noticed some things that were censored and not available anymore. Things that friends of mine had said, you got to read this. If it interests you, read this, see this. And they're not there anymore. He said, what's going on, Jim? And I said, well, it's censorship. This is, Reich economics and controlled by a fascist state. Get used to it. It's going to get worse. And they said, what do you mean it's going to get worse? I said, well, like bank transfers. Removal of cash. I've got a family member and friend from many years. And I said, you've got a lot of money, like 6 figures in a bank account. Do you have any idea what your risk is? Oh, Jim, just relax. It's a major bank. I said, major banks have the major derivative exposure. And he said, what's a derivative? I mean, people have all this risk, Dave, and they have no idea what's going on.
No, they really don't. And I wanted to go back to the economy for a sec, that you mentioned that you saw something changing, that things are a little different now and people are awakening. Now, do you think that people are starting to realize that the economy that, since 2008, they've been telling us that, we're in a recovery, it's doing fantastic. And now we have the GDP numbers at 4%. And, people are unemployed, retail, a lot of bankruptcies, Toys R Us, Bon-Ton, and many other stores, they're closing down. Do you think now it's hitting the level of the people and we're out of that statistical illusion and people are actually seeing it? And this is why you're seeing the awakening?
I think so. The dissonance, which just means mismatch, lack of harmony, the dissonance between what they see and what they are told by officials, like government officials, news networks. It does not match. They're thinking, what's going on here? I'm told there's really low unemployment, but I've never known so many people who just lost their jobs. What's going on? That's the dissonance. There are many types of dissonance. I'm just talking about a basic dissonance between what they see and observe and what they read about. I notice a lot of weird things. I call it component dissonance. We're told that the overall inflation rate is 3%, but we personally know several important items that are over 5. Well, how could several important items be over 5, but their average be 3? Okay, that's a component dissonance. The micro tells me this, but the macro tells me that, and they don't match. So people are noticing. I use my father as kind of a vote out there, because he reads the mainstream. He watches, the Sunday morning Meet the Press. He loves it. He doesn't quite realize it's mostly propaganda bullshit from the fascist state with censored messages and hidden globalist agenda. He doesn't even know what a globalist is. He said to me 6 months ago, Jimmy, use that word globalist entity. What's globalist? We're all on the same globe. What do you mean? I said, Dad, it's a global fascist state, new world order. He said, I don't know anything about that. My dad is a good vote for what's going on from the general middle of the road mainstream, and he is aware of the pedophile stories. He doesn't know how big it is. He doesn't know that it extends to Hollywood producers and to judges and to political figures in Washington. He thinks it's kind of isolated. Well, okay, soon he might not. I asked him about censorship. He said, I don't know anything about that. I asked him about whether he understands that New York Times and Washington Post are very much pro-Hillary and will never, tell the truth about what's going on. He said, well, I know they're basic liberal strongholds, but I don't know much more than that. I asked him if he's aware of the Clinton murders. And he said, well, I've heard some stories, but that was years ago. In other words, he's heard nothing of the 13 last year or year and a half ago during the campaign. He doesn't even know who Seth Rich is. So my father's noticing, my point is my father's noticing some things, events, phenomena, factors, ugliness creeping into the mainstream. And he usually follows it up by, well, Jim, I'm 98, so, this is going to be your problem, not mine. I said, yeah, I know, Dad. I hope you care about the quality of life for your 3 kids. And that usually does not prompt a good reaction. He usually gives me a snide comment in return. Oh, yeah, there you go again. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Let's just, can we just keep this a friendly conversation, Jim? I give my dad a lot of crap. I always have. And let me just share with you. Are you still there, Dave? I haven't heard from you. I'm rambling on. I'm sorry.
I'm letting you go. Go ahead.
Okay, that's okay. I reveal personal things more in interviews than any guy I know who's out there in the financial analyst world, gold community, etc. Here's a funny little one. When I was growing up, I came to learn my father's an American literature professor, and I'm not named after St. James, the apostle. I'm named after Henry James, the most prolific American author in history. Not American, in the 250, 300 years of our country. We have lots of poets from Concord, Massachusetts. We got lots of authors. He loved Mark Twain in his later years because it was just downright fun. Mark Twain is a hilarious guy. And he'd be quoting Mark Twain in his little epithets. And I said to him a year ago, Dad, I got a great one from Mark Twain. It's easier to fool somebody than it is to convince them they've been fooled, like you have for the last 20 years about the press networks. And he said, oh, gosh, Jim, there you go again, using my own favorite author. But I used to have an insult to my dad when I was young. I was in high school and college, and I used to say, Dad, you're reading lots of different fiction, and I wonder if you connect it to the real world. There's a real world out there. And that by this time, I had rebelled and pursued mathematics. I had a very interesting, effective method of having him leave me the hell alone with a summer list of reading 15 books when I wanted to play softball and work on my bike and build a crossbow. I intentionally did not get an A in English all through high school. So he'd leave me the hell alone. And I got the math award 3 of the 4 years. And he said, Jim, you're good in math. My hat's off to you. You've done well. And I never said to him, yeah, well, when I don't bother to read all the assigned books in English class, I got more time, Pop. So I used to tell him, Dad, you read 1984 by Orwell, you read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and you do not connect it to our world. You're still disconnected. And he said, well, I just don't see the 1984. I said, Dad, can you define fascism? That's what we got, blank air. Yeah. He did not know. My brother cannot define fascism, and he has a double bachelor's in political science and economics. Doesn't know what money is, doesn't know what fascism is. So how's the American educational system doing? He told me, Jim, there wasn't a single gold course offered in our economics curriculum. I said, was there an offering on fascism? And he said, yeah, I didn't take that. I was into other things like, socialist concepts and liberal. It just goes on. What the hell did you study in political science, John? You don't even know what fascism is. There was a great quote. I don't think I have it. Oh, yeah, here, it's right in front of my face. I put it up front in my July key quotes for the newsletter. Great quote by Norman Thomas, probably some political type author. Here's the quote. The American people will never knowingly adopt socialism, but under the name of liberalism, they will adopt every fragment of the socialist program until one day America will be a socialist nation without knowing how it happened. Wow. Yeah. So let's bring in some terrorism and let's cut back on the rights. Let's call Occupy Wall Street a terrorist organization. Let's censor the alternative news, and let's make it hard as hell to run through the customs to get into our country, to the point that we lost the Chicago bid for an Olympics site. Okay, there's your creeping fascism. Let's make it illegal to question the voting machines by Diebold. Let's conveniently murder anybody who challenges the Clinton Foundation. I mean, golly, how many? One of my funniest observations is they called it a suicide, but it was 2 shots to the head. I mean, I could see, a nail gun, but, usually a nail gun at 3 meters. Who in his right mind uses a nail gun to commit suicide? Oh, yeah, I couldn't find a knife. I couldn't find a gun. So I went to a construction site and stole a nail gun and shot myself in the head. Yeah, right. Well, there's no powder burns. But when it's 2 shots to the head, Dave, how the second one happen? Oh, I was critically wounded, but not dead. So I shot myself a second time to make sure in the head. Oh, come on. These are suicides. One of the most harrowing reactions I had to the fascist state killings was when a friend of mine from Central America sent me a message a little over a year ago saying that his sister knew one of the Florida holistic doctors who was murdered. And he was among 5 who were going to go to Germany at a conference on invitation to explain their research on the GCMAF enzymes that could be taken as supplements that arrest and reverse cancer. I told my father that story and my voice quivered. He said, Jim, are you okay? I said, Dad, this is close. This is a guy I know who has a sister who knows a doctor who was murdered who was involved in cancer cure. Okay, this is kind of close. Do you feel you're in danger? No, Dad, I'm just noticing the deafening, crippling effect emotionally of seeing close up the murders to keep this whole system in place. He does not accept that the medical and pharmaceutical sectors are part of a vicious, malicious monopoly. Here's just a funny little fact, Dave. We're a sick nation. We're an obese nation. We got hypertension. We've got depression. We're the sickest nation on earth in the United States. We're the most heavily medicated. And here's the sickening fact. One of the top 3 reasons for bankruptcy is medical costs. And I know someone right now who's suffering severe medical costs right now. But it's not because of, getting vaccinated and all this. No. Medical costs. One of my fears is medical costs. When I started getting this bronchitis without end in May of last year, I thought, oh my gosh, could this be the end of my unbelievably good health? Well, I'm happy to say that I had an infection, a strange infection a month ago. I did not like to take the antibiotics, but I did. And I took a stronger one because it didn't work for a very nasty rash. And I noticed that my lungs are clearing up. My bronchial tubes are clearing up a little more. We were talking about this before the recording, but I used to go, clearing my throat 20 times a day. Now it's just a couple times. So my regimen is going to be every 4 months, I'm going to take some antibiotics until this is all gone. I'm not going to just take it over and over and over again for 3 weeks, because that's not a healthy thing to do. Now we're a nation of opioid addicts. I got an email from a colleague saying, Jim, drug addiction is a tremendous globalist cabal control mechanism. I mean, forget alcohol. Narcotics it's powerful and it's legal, and the pharmacies make money, and the big pharma makes big money, and they get the nice supply routes from Afghanistan for our boys are making it and protecting it. And all the costs are covered by the U.S. government, and big pharma loves it. But now you get a state reaction. State after state is limiting the opioid prescriptions. And I came across a fact that just appalling. 2017, Ohio, population 12 million. Ohio had 80 million prescriptions for opioids. That's 7 for every man, woman, and child in the state per year. Okay, obviously everyone's not taking it. So somebody's taking dozens and dozens, if not hundreds. We're becoming a nation of drug addicts. I got people sending me email, clients saying, Jim, I'm in Michigan. I've got a cleaning service. It's floor cleaning, wall cleaning, you name it, cleaning. What do you call it? Sandblasting of buildings. I got, to get the soot off and stuff like that. And it leaves the bricks just a little bit damaged, but, a little pockmark. Anyway, I've got an opening for 100 people. And I got applicants all over the place. And I'm rejecting 80% of them for being on welfare or being a drug addict. We're a nation of addicts. We're a nation of pizza and Coca-Cola addicts. Drug addicts, narco, booze, beer. Can't watch a football game without a beer ad. And, it's getting worse. You got a $5 million annual football, NCAA and NFL contract from the military. You can't have an important sporting event in football without an honor guard. Okay, this is all fascist creep and addiction control. And I refuse to be controlled unless you've got a special additive to chocolate, Dave. I've got some, a European chocolate that I purchase once in a while, and it's nice. Sometimes it's the dark chocolate, and sometimes I get the milk chocolate, and it's got little nuggets. I just love my chocolate. What can I say? And I'm not overweight. Until I get overweight, I'll still do it. But oh my gosh, it's distressing, this creep. And yeah, Norman Thomas, you got it right. We got a fascist creep here going on. Adopt every fragment of the socialist program. I just had a fellow tell me a few days ago, I think it was another interview host, he said, I know what it was. It was Gerald Celente. He was on Greg Hunter's show. And Celente was saying, we've got a new phenomenon going on in the entire news network system. And it's that there's very little news anymore. There's very little in the way of cub reporters digging out new stories to make a name or pursue the Pulitzer. You've got the New York Daily Post laying off half of its reporters. You've got the Wall Street Journal, 30% less content. And in the content, a lot more photos. In other words, less words. And what it's becoming is the news networks are publishing the standard watered-down fascist Reich messages. Again, R-E-I-C-H, not right versus left. The Reich system messages. The news is being controlled. We don't care about a story about the Midwest and a family that helped a bunch of orphans. We don't care about them. Many of those orphans are gonna end up in Clinton's sex rings with unmarked graves after they're done with them. Okay? We don't have stories anymore. We have the official propaganda bullshit. So Celente said, you could take a look at Toledo, and I think he said Omaha, and their news reporting system is all reduced. They take the AP Newswire. And what he didn't say was it's all Langley approved. So, we're well along in the Reich economic system where everything is pretty well broken and dependent on handouts and hyperinflation money. I'm talking about QE and the Fed's monetary program. I asked my dad several months ago, Dad, the Federal Reserve is covering our national debt. We're financing it with bonds that are purchased by the Fed. He said, yeah, I know a little about that, Jim. I don't know much. I said, in other words, Dad, we don't have bond investors much. And there's something that you don't know about, and that's the Department of Treasury have derivatives coming out of machinery that we're purchasing bonds to cover our debt from computer machineries with fancy algorithms that work off differentials and produce fake demand. I said, Dad, there are very few buyers at our auctions. They're mostly computers. He said, well, that's not good, is it? No, Dad, it's not good. And how do you think it's going to affect your entire estate? Well, I'm not going to worry about that. We're becoming a nation of dummies. Economic finance dummies, Dave.
Hey, Jim, you're talking about bonds right now. Have you heard about the Treasury expanding the bond market to get more buyers?
How do you mean expand the bond market?
It looks like they're going to allow more and more individuals buy the Treasury bonds.
Oh, expand the auction?
Yes.
Open the doors for more individual buyers.
Yes, because the economy is so strong right now. That's what they're saying.
Okay, so in other words, people that I know who have good savings can go down to their bank and buy a bond that's wrapped up in some kind of a CD.
Yeah.
Well, to me, that means they're going to create certain instruments at banks that are certificates of deposit, the CDs. And they're going to open up the pension system. This is a topic that was pretty hot about 3 years ago. Will there be forced purchase of Treasury bonds by pension funds? Think of the managed corporate pension, like at IBM. Are they going to be forced into buying Treasury bonds? And we got the term specialized Treasury bond. Okay, well, what was that? Well, this is 2 or 3 years ago. Well, it was a special bond that pension funds could buy that would be connected to the U.S. Treasury bond system. In other words, outside the auction network, outside the big bank bond issuance with their ridiculous fees. Well, now they have to worry about blockchain moving into their ground and eliminating them through disintermediation, which is a favorite topic of one of my jackass colleagues, Sky Crane. He said, that's going to happen, Jim. All right, so now we apparently are going to see some bigger, wider connection through the CD sector, certificates of deposit. They call them plazos here, placements in Latin America. And the local CDs pay twice the interest of the United States because they're more legitimate. You take a look at the U.S. dollar plazos and various banks here. They pay 3% for 12 months, but the local ones pay 7% for 12 months. Okay, I think what they're doing here, Dave, is they're making the early connection for pensions and individuals for buying the specialized Treasury bonds. This looks like an initial step. I wouldn't be at all surprised in a few months if they talk about the specialized treasury bonds that are going to be offered with encouragement to the pension funds, and watch Vanguard gobble it up. Vanguard is the cabal mutual fund and pension center. It'll be interesting to watch, the second tier of companies, whether they follow the leader or whether they're coerced in some way. I don't have a lot of details on this, but I will keep my eyes open. So the bond market is expanding. I have been watching and looking for damage. Now that you mentioned bond expansion, I'm watching for primary dealers turning up dead. I don't mean physically dead. I mean their business is ruined and they cannot manage their offices anymore with the role as a primary dealer for treasury bonds in that special role with the Department of Treasury. I haven't seen much damage there. I saw damage a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. Some big bank backed out, said we're not going to be a bond dealer anymore. And I'm wondering, okay, how much damage did they suffer? What type of damage did they have? Did they lose money? And the damage comes like this. The primary dealer would be forced to accept and swallow a certain amount of allocated bonds at an auction, like 5% of them. But if he couldn't find buyers as the intermediary, bond investors, then he'd have to hold them against his will and tie up his money and get messed up in his business. Okay, there was some damage in 2014 and 15, but I think we're not seeing the primary bond dealer damage for a very simple reason, and that is the Fed is buying everything in sight with help from their minions in Wall Street. By the way, if you've got a Chase bank card, don't use it to sign up for the hat trick letter. JP Morgan Chase. The Chase card does not work in making a new subscription for the hat trick letter. I got a dozen or more examples of clients writing me. I tried to sign up, I couldn't. And I with a flippant response, I said, do you have a Wall Street bank card? Let me guess, Chase? And I was right 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years. And it's kind of funny. One client signed up by sending me a Western Union. She said, I've only got Chase. I've got one Chase card. I don't use it much, and that's the only one I've got. How can I pay you for a newsletter? I said, send me a Western Union. So she did. And she said, I'll tell you what, let's make this real easy. I'll give you 2 years worth. I'll make it $440. So I said, well, take a little discount on that for the Western Union cost because it's not small anymore. I could go on about some of these financial entities with their shenanigans, but let's just leave it at that. The primary bond dealers.
Jim, I wanted to go back for a sec to what you were talking about, the economy and how people notice the difference. And I wanted to get your take on what the central bank has been saying in the last couple of weeks, where the IMF first, they said they're looking to create this rainy day fund for Europe. And, if the economy is so strong, why do we need a rainy day fund for the European banks? The other one is that the Bank of International Settlement said banks may be using Lehman-style tricks to disguise their debt. Now, these are very strange messages coming out of the...
Who made the second message about hiding debt?
BIS.
Oh, BIS, uh-huh.
Yeah, the Bank of International Settlement. To me, this is what it sounds like. First, the IMF is, worrying that the economy, the global economy, is not doing well. They're very worried about Europe, and this is why they want this rainy day fund, just in case, or not just in case, when the system starts to collapse, they have extra funds to help out the banks. And the BIS, it seems like they're kind of separating themselves from the banking system, saying, hey, we know that these banks are doing some type of trick, like Lehman-style tricks, to disguise their debt, and we're separating ourselves from the banking system. These are very strange messages coming out of the central bank when we're supposedly in this, great economy. The Fed's raising interest rates. They're telling us how great everything is, and they're coming out with all these different messages. What do you make of all this?
It's debt suffocation. It's bond collapse. and it's permanent recession, which has another name called depression. It's bank system failure, and it's all happening at the same time. I have a phrase that I coined, a term. I noticed after Lehman, by the way, Lehman was a kill event. It was not a bank failure, not a financial firm failure. JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs bought some bonds and never paid for them. It was a few $1 billion worth. They never paid Lehman, and they croaked for non-payment. If you want to kill a big business, just make sure that their accounts receivables skyrocket and never get paid. Okay, so they suffocated Lehman. After Lehman, I made a forecast that we would go to 0%. A lot of people called me crazy. I said, well, just watch. I got into a big dispute with a German ex-CEO who said the European Central Bank and the Bundesbank will never follow the Fed down toward zero. I said, well, give it time. I had to be very tactful because I'm talking to an ex-CEO. He later agreed, okay, Jimmy, you got that right. I didn't expect that. I said, well, my reasoning was sound. They would go down in rates because the euro would rise in value on the Forex market from just a rate differential. And he said, okay, good point. Good point. Didn't think about that. Okay, so I watched the reaction. Then I said, okay, we're going to follow Japan. We're going to go to QE. We're going to print money and monetize the U.S. government debt because it's getting too big and the dollar is getting too tarnished. And we need a mechanism to cover our debt because the bond auctions are at risk. We're going to use derivatives and we're going to use basic QE. Okay, people told me, no, we'll never follow Japan. We'll never print money to cover our debt. We'll never do QE to monetize our debt. Of course, we did by 2011 and 12. 2011, I guess. Okay, so I came up with a term, Dave. I call it the systemic Lehman event. Because I reasoned that our response to Lehman was to make everything in the financial system just like the subprime mortgage bonds. And I said, we're doing it to sovereign bonds. We're making the U.S. Treasury bond like a subprime mortgage bond. Oh, no, Jim, you don't understand. It's AAA. Yeah, AAA by force. Look what happened to S&P when they did a downgrade. The executive got fired. Well, I didn't notice that. Yeah, well, people don't notice a lot of things because they're not that bright. They don't follow up. They don't do studies. They don't study much. They're not good students. They're not good at what they do. Okay, then I noticed that the Euro Central Bank, this was more recent, like 2 years ago, they started buying corporate bonds. Okay, so the subprime mortgages have extended to sovereign bonds and leading corporate bonds. Now we have the highest percentage of corporate bonds that are BBB that we've ever seen. Okay, we've turned corporate bonds into junk bonds or the margin of junk bonds by virtue of extending QE. Then they extended QE to cover the crude oil market because the big Wall Street banks had huge exposure to the shale sector. And they let the word out. We need $70 oil to cover our big credit portfolio in the energy sector. And then we start seeing the Fed covering the stock market with S&P purchases. Okay, so we've turned the stock market into subprime financial entity because their earnings don't justify their prices. The corporate bonds have such low yields on their offerings that they don't match the conditions for their profitability. And furthermore, the big companies are abusing their bond issuance by doing stock buybacks with it. So the abuse to make subprime the bonds and subprime their stocks is becoming internalized. And then you got all the repatriated money that Trump tried to encourage to come back home, He urged it not to go into executive packages and stock buybacks, but he didn't stop it, so it did that. More subprime features to our stocks and bonds. Okay, my point is, in response to your question about rainy day fund and concealing debt, IMF and Bank for International Settlement, BIS, my response is they're noticing the entire subprime financial sectors, multiple sectors, with debt suffocation. You take a look at the corporate debt as a relation to their sales. Never been higher. Bond collapses. Just take a look at junk bonds that are failing. Never bigger. Take a look at the recession. Okay, I really like John Williams and his shadow government statistics. I really like their work. I mean, it's a man after my own heart, doing pure statistics, gathering and publishing. I like to do the analysis, so I didn't do what he did. But I've always honored his work. I've always shared his work. I've always used his work and put it out front. And he's got a pair of consumer price index graphs from last month, or I think it was June. And it was the 1980 method of CPI calculation, which shows that the United States is now dealing with 10% price inflation. And it was like 8.5% last year, or 9%. That's the 1980 formula. But if you look at the 1990 formula, it's only 6%, whereas last year it was 5.5%. Okay, I like going back farther because it was done more honestly back then. This is pre-Clinton. Clinton was the beginning of data corruption with the economy. Robert Rubin had his big hand in there. Robert Rubin was a designer of the new reformed consumer price index. I don't want to get into all the different features like geometric mean and substitution and all kinds of things. Don't want to get into all that. Just want to get into what the 1980 figure is of 10%. If we claim that there's 3% inflation and it's really 10, then you need to subtract 7% off what they claim to be the adjusted economic growth, the GDP. They say we got 2% growth. Subtract 7, and you get -4 or -5. Every single year since Lehman, it's -4 or -5 or -3.5. By reducing by the accurate count for price inflation. Our growth is mostly price inflation. What we claim as growth is mostly price inflation. We've got 12 consecutive years of vicious recession on the order of -3 to -5% every year. Chapwood did an independent consumer price index calculation having nothing to do with the methods used by John Williams at Shadow Government Stats. Chapwood took 50 American cities and a basket of 500 items. And he concluded 2 years ago, he called it the Chapwood CPI index. He concluded that the big cities have 10 to 12% inflation, and the rest of the country with the minor cities has about 8% price inflation. And he concluded that in the last 20 years, our economy has shrunk by 22%. Okay, these are independent, high-quality statistical methods being used. I'm sure stratified random sampling is being used, very accurate stuff, advanced stuff. And now the IMF and BIS is starting to see the effects on debt suffocation, bond collapse, economic recession, and bank system failures like what we're seeing in Italy with bank runs. Okay, you can't conceal debt for very long because you need to service it. It's like, it's like pus that comes up above your skin surface and you got a big fat boil in the middle of your forehead. That's what debt suffocation ends up eventually. Bond collapse, you just can't hide for too often. You can have the Fed and you can have the Euro Central Bank buying up corporate bonds. But what they're not going to buy is the second tier of corporate bonds. So they're going to start to slip into B territory, junk bond territory, non-investment grade. You could hide your economic recession for a while until everybody and his stinking brother knows somebody who was just laid off or a business failed. And they go down to the mall and they see that a third of the stores are boarded up. And some of the other ones are now offices that used to be stores. So the great consumption economy of the United States in the 2000 decade led to ruin. You do not consume yourself to prosperity. You build to prosperity with value added. And we have lost that because we shipped out our industry. I remember in 84, I tell this all the time, Intel sent their chip fabrication plants to the Pacific Rim. 4 or 5 of us sat around in our office at Digital Equipment reading a Wall Street Journal. And I said, give this 20 years, guys, and we're going to have big problems from lost legitimate income. We're going to be depending on debt and who knows what else. And someone chimed in, well, maybe asset bubbles, Jim, like the stock market. If it goes up, people can sell their mutual fund and continue their standard of living. Right. Okay. So asset bubbles and debt dependence. That's what we bought. That's what we got. That is the result of shipping out our legitimate income from industry. We need to bring it back. And Trump vowed to do that in his campaign. And he's so embroiled with the nonsense from the fascist state news networks and political dogs that he can't do his agenda. And I think he also has some problems with, foreign nations and their gigantic reserves. They don't want to invest in the United States with new infrastructure. They want to dump their treasury bond. They want to get rid of a few $100 billion in treasury bonds. So I'm looking for the second term of Trump, not the midterm election, the second term. I think he's going to win a landslide. By the way, the National Security Agency did an independent study of the election for 2016, and they concluded that Trump won 70 million votes and Hillary won 58 million votes for a 10%, 9% biggest landslide victory in the history of the United States. But it appeared to be closer from astonishing, voluminous voter fraud in favor of Hillary. It did not work. Now, did they stop the voter fraud? No, they stopped enough of the voter fraud to make a 12 million vote victory more like, what was it? 500,000 vote victory for Trump? So his margin of victory was 20 times bigger than what the official figures say. That's what the NSA concluded, not some alternative news feature. No. Okay, so I'm thinking there's going to be a midterm election success for whatever Trump supports. The fascists will lose more ground. And we've got something coming up. I'm hearing it's October, and I'm not a big expert on this, but it's something that will require the news networks to deliver impartial news or face lawsuits. I wanted them to lose their FCC licenses, but apparently Trump has chosen to go the lawsuit route. For instance, Monsanto is facing a lot of lawsuits right now for cancer deaths having to do with glyphosate, the Roundup chemical, which the FDA corruptly was influenced into calling an antibiotic. So a pesticide was called an antibiotic so it could appear in vaccines. We're going to have lawsuits to Monsanto. I think Trump wants to eradicate a whole level of deep state from lawsuits and the omnibus bill to go after them for pedophile, child sex, slavery, sex rings. Now I'm hearing that Judge Anthony Scalia was not killed by suffocation of a pillow over his head. The pillow was kept over his head to hide pictures being taken from his throat being slit by a 13-year-old boy. Forced sex. Okay, we've got a nation filled with scum in our leadership and executive all across the nation in its industries, in its institutions. We got charitable organizations that are corrupt fronts. We got United Way. We got American Cancer Institute with 95% overhead. In other words, they're taking 95% for limousines, executive lunches, and high salaries. For what? For concealing the cancer cures. I think the IMF and the BIS are running scared because they see coming from the East the gold standard. and they can't stop it. They can't stop the non-dollar platforms. Can't stop what's coming as, a powerful RMB-based oil contract. It's called the Petro Yuan. I call it the RMB oil contract. They can't stop it. It's already got bigger volume than the Brent. And Brent is largely going to die from the depletion of the North Sea, between Norway and Britain. It's largely depleted. There's not much going on there. The Norwegians are some of the best engineers for petroleum and deep sea drilling, and they're being hired all over the world, like in the Gulf, Persian Gulf. They hate that name, but the Gulf region, the Arab Gulf region. They're the best. The Saudis hire Norwegians. They're the best for putting in place the platforms. Okay, can't stop the gold standard coming. Can't stop the gold trade note that I think is coming soon, and I think it's going to be considered interchangeable with a short-term Chinese government bill, not the bond, but a bill. Government debt in the form of a securitized instrument, but it's going to be short-term. Therefore, the Chinese government bill, I think, is going to be equivalent, interchangeable with the gold trade note, and I expect them to use the gold trade note to buy Arab oil and to buy African oil. This is how it's going to get a big boost. They can't stop CIPS, the Chinese interbank payment system, cross-border interbank payment system, the competitor to SWIFT. They can't stop the Belt and Road Initiative. The United States doesn't want to have anything to do with it. We got a few companies in there struggling for a piece of the action. There's General Electric in there. There are a couple other companies in there struggling because there's something like $6 to $8 trillion of commitments. And they're working on their first trillion now of actual projects that are funded. The United States is not involved in much of this, and the dollar's not involved in the payment system. U.S. cannot stop this. They're watching Iran and the workarounds, the barter programs, the barter systems worked out with the Import-Export Bank regarding China, regarding the guaranteed purchase of oil by Russia. Oil purchased by Russia, they're a producer. Why are they buying? They're trying to create what I call the oil cartel, the Rosneft oil pool. The Russian oil pool will be non-dollar. They'll manage the contaminant level. They'll manage the viscosity level. And they'll be buying up Venezuelan oil. They'll be buying up Iranian oil. And they'll be buying up Saudi oil. And they'll be buying up Mexican oil to assure those nations of adequate liquidity in the case that they become problem children for the United States. Iran workarounds are going to be a problem as a model creation for dollar rebellion. Iran is suffering. Iran has got big problems. I'm not a big fan of Iran. I don't care about Iran. I've only met 2 or 3 of them in my whole life. I met one skiing in Maine. Boy, we have interesting conversation for 3 hours by the fire that night. Don't want to get into all that. But he did tell me that 90% of the people want the United States to get rid of their mullahs. I said, what? 90% of the Iranian citizens want the United States to come in and sweep out the mullahs? He said, yes, the mullahs have connections with the West. Oh, yeah, okay. And later I came to learn that they got huge hidden Swiss bank accounts. They're skimming off the Iranian oil. Anyway, the Iran workarounds, like Iran's sale of oil to India was paid in Turkish gold. Okay, the triangle, the gold for oil. Okay, that was a workaround. Now you got Turkey applying. I don't even know the right word. They're making overtures that they might be invited into the BRICS. So it'd be the BRICS with a T at the end. Maybe Iran will join. It'd be the BRICS with 2 I's and a T at the end. Turkey, I think, due to its 1,000-year history of gold provision and gold expertise, they might join the BRICS in order to help deliver some of the South African gold that's kind of put on mothballs. Their mines are waiting. It's the only reason they're in the BRICS, because they're a pretty decrepit nation. South Africa they're in the process of passing a law to confiscate white property now. I mean, without compensation, an eminent domain confiscation, not purchase. It's crazy what's going on. But Turkey is probably going to be joined at the hip with Iran as principal players in the Eurasian trade zone. They call it the Eurasian Economic Union, but I don't like another EU. We've got already 2 EUs, and I think maybe Eurasian Trade Zone might be a better name to just get the economy in formation for the Belt and Road and all its hundreds of billion-dollar projects. BIS and IMF are running scared. IMF is an empty office, Dave. They brought in the Chinese RMB currency into the special drawing rights currency basket, and ever since then, the IMF has been an empty office. They don't do anything.
So you mentioned the Belt and Road and the BRICS and all of that, and sure you won. Does that mean the petrodollar is kind of doomed? Because we see out in Syria that war is like coming to an end. It looks like all the paid mercenary armies, the white helmets, they're all running. And soon with Iraq, Lebanon, and the rest of the Middle East, where we had the deep state go in there and have regime change, it looks like things might be changing now, and it might be the end of the petrodollar. Is that why all this is building up now?
I think so. The petrodollar was the mechanism to keep the dollar in place as the global currency reserve. Now, in the last 40 years, the proportion of oil sales in commercial trade is down by a half. So it's not going to be necessarily oil that is critical as a new foundation for the gold standard, but it is something that will displace the dollar's foundation. What I mean by that is the dollar used to be dependent on oil. The gold standard will be less dependent on oil, but usage of gold payment to pay for oil will be critical in deposing the dollar. So look for the gold trade note to be an important payment system for, say, the Saudis, UAE, Kuwait, and Iraq. Okay, and maybe Iran. Iran could really get a boost from using gold payments like in a gold trade note for Chinese purchases. Okay, but you mentioned Syria. I have been saying for the last year, every single U.S. government foreign policy initiative and policy since 9/11, since the fascists took over, has been a failure, and a grotesque failure. You could make a list as long as your arm. Everything has been a failure. The next failures to become much more visible will be Syria and Yemen. The Yemenis, Yemeni, I don't know the right. The people from Yemen, the fighters from Yemen, those in control of Yemen in the battles, have threatened with missile strikes now, Abu Dhabi and the UAE. They had a couple missiles fired at Riyadh, capital of Saudi. I don't know if they hit or made much damage, but they got missiles. And these are coming from Iran, and they're probably coming from Russia. I don't have all the details on what the markings are for Yemen missiles, but now you've got a Yemen takeover of a Saudi oil tanker in the Straits. The Straits by Djibouti and Aden. Aden is in Yemen. Okay, this is a strait, and it's got constriction, and now you've got Yemen pirates threatening Saudi ships. And the Saudis have announced they're not going to be shipping oil through the Suez Canal and those straits by Djibouti and Aden. Okay, well, that's European oil supply from Saudi. And what Saudi does, I don't know if, say, UAE shipments are going to get the same treatment. Maybe they will, because UAE and Saudi are funding the Yemen war. Okay, backtrack. Simple question. What is the basis of Saudi's interest in Yemen? Very simple. They're running out of oil. The Saudis have had an unchanged 260 billion barrel oil reserve on the wall for the last 30 years. You can't be the number one producer of oil and have no depletion of your oil reserves. Oh, they claim to have new discoveries. Oh, great. I think the new discoveries are of mineral metals and gold, much more than oil. The Aramco deal is failing because of discovery phase. They can't prove their oil reserves. So no one wants their Aramco. Now we're going to have a hilarious event coming where the Chinese will buy what we're told is 10%, but will really be about 30%, or maybe they'll buy 5% and it'll really be 35%. The Russians will buy 4% and it'll really be 28%. And the Russians and Chinese together will own 55% of Aramco when the rest of the world is told they own 10 because of falsified discovery phase that didn't pass muster. Okay, you mentioned Syria. Okay, fine. I've got a colleague who follows Syria almost every day, and that's all fine. It's failing. It just is failing. We're evacuating, and we're going to see more failures. We're going to see, I think, the failure of Saudi Arabia. Oil income is down, costly Yemen war. The arrests of elites and royals did not pan out very well, caused a lot of resentment. And the only investors that I see in Saudi Arabia are the Chinese. So I think a critical country right now is Saudi Arabia. And another critical country for a different reason is Germany, as they pretty much push aside the Russian sanctions. The U.S. government going after Nord Stream 2 with threats of sanction against German construction and finance companies was a very, very big mistake. The Germans have responded to Russian sanctions by opening up subsidiaries in Russia so their output could be sold to Russians in the Russian market without violating the sanctions because it's made in Russia. Just got a German brand on it. The Germans are so pissed off they had a lawsuit at the EU Commission in Brussels that they won, that Nord Stream could proceed, Nord Stream 2. It'll double the output. Okay, here's a funny little fact I just learned. If the United States wants to sanction all the companies involved with Nord Stream, are they going to sanction British Rolls-Royce? They make turbines. They make gas turbines that are used with the Nord Stream pipeline system. We're going to sanction the British Rolls-Royce? I don't think so. So the hypocrisy will come out. Dave, I'm going to have to conclude this. I've got an appointment in like 20 or 30 minutes, 25 minutes. Okay. We're seeing the results, the bitter, ugly failure in rotten fruit and broken places, broken locations. Look at Syria, and you've got independent studies saying it needs $200 billion worth of foreign direct investment to rebuild. Why do they need to rebuild? Because we bombed the hell out of it. And people don't even look at the motive. The Golan Heights is a rich area for the Levant oil and gas deposit system that's well known in the Mediterranean with the Tamar floating platform, but it extends inland in locations that Israel does not want to share. They want it all. And they're willing to murder and kill civilians and sweep them out with a war and wreck their economy so that the area in South Syria can be vacated and then can be drilled for oil. And the board members are people like Dick Cheney, Rothschild, Lawrence Summers, Rupert Murdoch. They're on the board of Genie, G-E-N-I-E, and they own the rights for the Syrian oil deposits and gas deposits. My gosh, is the United States going to take over Mexico and claim rights to their remaining oil and gas and silver? Why not? If it's done by the elites, it'll all be legal, right? No, this is all coming to the head, realizing the broken systems and rotten fruit. U.S. foreign policy has been bully tactics, has been coercion, been bribery, it's been murder, it's been takeovers, it's been NGO, grassroots political. And we need to have Soros and his boys exposed. It's not happening yet. It's in the process.
So you think that this whole thing is coming to an end? All the deep state type of tactics that they used in the past. All these people are being routed out right now, and all of it will come to an end.
Pretty much, yeah. I think it's being rooted out. I use root. It's going to require hundreds of people to be exposed, and it started with Lady Bronfman. And I got some Canadian clients who say there's a chain, a large chain of retail the name is Cadillac something. And it's all over Canada, and the Seagram's family, I mean, the Seagram's company owns it, and the Bronfman own it.
So to wrap this whole thing up, we talked about the economy, we talked about what's happening in the Middle East. Where do you see all of this headed if everything is moving towards China, Russia, everything was set up, the petro-yuan and stuff? The U.S., I mean, we talked about this before, but does Trump realize that we have no gold, or does he know that we have gold? Do we have enough here to allow us to move forward in the new system?
I don't know, Dave. This is one of the biggest questions right now out there. Does the United States have the gold? I'm told that there was a special commission done in the first few months of his office in 2017, and he came to the ugly realization that Fort Knox gold was all stolen by Bush and Clinton. And his mission after that was to recover it, and I'm told by certain corners that there was a large degree of success. But I don't have the details, and you can't look that up. You can't do a search and find information on what the elite crimes are. You can't do that.
So you're talking about the gold note and stuff like that. So you think at this point, from your research and what you found out, we have enough gold to get onto this new gold note system?
I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. I cannot say we have the gold. I cannot say we found the gold. I cannot say that large troves are in the process of being monetized that were in deep storage. I can't say. You can't prove anything. That's a problem with elite crimes. Elite crimes end up rewriting history and making information inaccessible.
So if we don't have the gold and, we go onto this gold note, what happens here in the U.S.? How do we survive this?
If we don't have the gold?
Yeah.
Then the gold standard imposition by the East will result in the United States falling into the third world. We'll have a currency crisis. Take a close look at what's going on in Venezuela. I know people say, it could never happen here. Well, what if we print money to cover all the debts, and the rest of the world is gradually turning to gold and gold payment systems and gold platforms, and we're sanctioning country after country after country after country after country, and then we finally sanction most of Europe, and they don't accept the dollar, and they don't operate on the dollar. What do? We have our own currency, and we support our debt with printing, monetizing our debt. And our currency loses value very, very rapidly. So we must source the gold. We must source it by our own ownership or by lease. And no one wants to lease it because we always steal it. That is the conclusion to end this by, Dave. That's the conclusion. Okay. We need to source the gold by ownership, rescue, or leasing, or we fall into the third world. Because the rest of the world is not going to wait any longer. They're moving, not hyperspeed, they're moving in a very solid second gear right now toward the gold standard.
Okay, Jim, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people get in touch with you and see your work?
It's at goldenjackass.com, www.goldenjackass.com. That's the website, and has a free public domain page with public interviews, links, and articles, and it has a members area where the newsletter resides, and people access from a paid subscription and a login that gets provided. So I encourage people to go to the website, bounce around, learn a little bit, bounce around, and just cover some things that you might be familiar with, and maybe learn a few extra things, and sign up for the newsletter. It's a labor of love, Dave, and I was just shocked at how much. The volume of clicks we had for the June 7th or June 9th interview. It's got over 200,000, and it's amazing. So here we are on August 3rd, and 2 months later, and thanks for having me on. And I just hope that people can understand the gradual shifts that are happening in the United States and the West in general. There's a resistance to the fascist movement right now, and it's